Hello, folks, and welcome to today's expert webinar series presentation. It is titled, What Me Worried? Actions and Ideas to Help Minimize Cybersecurity Threats in a Post-COVID World. It'll be presented today by Michael Seip. He is a security consultant and project manager with Withum Cyber. We're certainly happy to have him today about a topic that is so present in our daily lives, not even around the COVID world, but certainly all over the news these days with how cybersecurity threats impact us. So this will be a very interesting, unique presentation for our audience today, and we're excited to have him. Like I said, thank you for joining us today. My name is Thomas Provine, and I am a marketing coordinator here at Accountants World, and I'll be taking care of the hosting duties for today. Most of you have joined us on other GoToWebinar presentations before, but I just wanted to go over the GoToWebinar control panel. We want you to use that orange arrow to expand and hide the panel. You can toggle through your audio options, whether it be telephone, computer speakers, or you can click the phone icon and expand the question section and type your question and click send. Today's presentation is going to be very in-depth into cybersecurity threats and how they can impact your daily lives as well as your daily lives, as well as your businesses. So we encourage you to ask questions in the question section. We'll answer those questions post-webinar. If anybody has any questions regarding any technical questions that are coming up, myself and Sharon will be in the background and will help answer those technical questions that you may have. There will be one CPE question offered for today's webinar. Most of you know, but we'll go through it again. What are those three things that you need in order to get continuing education credit? You need to attend this live webinar for no less than 50 minutes, respond to all of the polling questions. There will be 3 polling questions during today's webinar presentation, and submit the post-webinar survey within 24 hours after the webinar has ended. How will you receive your CPE? Well, you'll be notified by email within 3 business days, and we encourage you to add webinar@accountantsworld.com to your trusted email list. Just a reminder to everybody, throughout the year this year with GoToWebinar, we've seen an issue where people haven't been able to answer the polling questions because they are in full screen mode in the webinar. You will not be able to answer them if you are in full screen mode. Once the polling question pops up, we ask that you exit out of full screen mode, click the response that you think is most applicable to you, send it through, and then you can exit back into full screen mode. It's a glitch within GoToWebinar's engine. We've messaged them about it several times. We haven't really gotten a response on it yet, but we just want to make sure that, all of those polling questions are tabulated today. So once again, just make sure if you're in full screen, exit out of full screen, click the response that you want, send it through, and then you can go right back into full screen mode following that. We want to let everybody know about a live CPE webinar that's going to be taking place next Monday, December 7th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. It is titled 7 Secrets to More Profitable Payroll Processing. What we have found for most accountants and payroll processors, that they're making more money per hour with some of these payroll services than their peers are making with accounting or audit services. So if you're probably wondering what their secret is, well, they've mastered tactics that can minimize their labor costs, that can automate their processing, and set clear expectations for their clients. And we want to lend that experience to you with this webinar that's taking place on December 7th at 2 p.m. So if you are interested, we would like for you to answer our first polling question today. And that polling question is simple. Register me for the 7 Secrets to More Profitable Payroll Processing webinar. All right. So I'd like to ask everybody to answer this question. We've done this webinar as a trial run internally at Accountants World, and it is chock full of great information on how to make more profitable the payroll processing that you do at your firm, whether you are an accountant or whether you are someone who is in the payroll processing field already. And being that it is getting towards the end of the calendar year, we think that this could be a really beneficial session for everybody who's interested in more profitable payroll processing. So with that, we have about 90% of everybody who has voted. We're going to keep it going here for just another 10 to 15 seconds. We just want to get everybody involved. Alrighty. Okay, coming up on a minute here, going once, going twice, going 3 times. All right, and we will close that for everybody. And we want to thank you for voting. We hope to see you at that presentation on December 7th at 2 p.m. A little bit about our presenter today, Michael Seip. He is a security consultant and project manager at Withum Cyber. He has about 12 years experience as a director of operations and security manager at Withum Cyber, and it's one of the most recognized cybersecurity firms, cybersecurity divisions, I should say, in our country. And he's also a veteran. We thank you for your service, Michael. He did 9 years of service as a U.S. Navy aviator, and we love his material here today, and we'd like to thank you for joining us, Michael Seip, and I'll pass the presenter controls on to you.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be here, and good afternoon to everyone who is attending. You can probably tell right off the bat by the sound of my voice, this isn't the normal lush baritone. I am battling a COVID unrelated illness, so forgive me for struggling through the presentation. I ask that you stay with me. I think it should be just fine. It'll limit my exposition to rambling speeches or less, so I think it'll probably work out in everyone's best interests. Excuse me. And as Tom mentioned, my background was initially military. I flew jets for the Navy, F-14s and F-18s, for those of you who are familiar. I was on Atlantic Fleet, USS Enterprise, and I did 2 tours of duty to Iraq and Afghanistan. I became interested in cybersecurity ironically, while I was flying jet aircraft, and cybersecurity aren't necessarily that related, but we did a lot of, in a flying capacity, we did a lot of operations that were directly in support of what's called governmental operations, supporting infrastructure and whatnot throughout, in particular, Afghanistan, but also in Iraq, the coalition building, as it were. And
Michael, would you mind sharing your screen? I sent you over the presenter controls.
I apologize. Thank you, Tom. Let's do show screen. Okay, is that it? Everybody look good? Does it look good, Tom? Okay.
Yep, you're seeing everything. Great.
So I started off like an all-star by showing the screen. Well done. Thanks, Tom. And so long and short of it is that even in wartime around the world, in areas that you think would be some of the least likely to have IT security concerns and infrastructure, they do. And in particular, I've been with Withum now for 2 years plus. I head up the penetration testing vertical, what's called pen testing. Get into a brief description of that later, but in that role, the guys that work for me are effectively good guy hackers, is an easy way to put it. For our clients, we employ the same techniques and tactics that bad actors do in the wild, and we look for compromises or vulnerabilities in our clients' security posture, and it's oftentimes the only way, but certainly one of the best ways to determine if you are secure, if your defense is effective, is to take shots at your defense, find out if it holds. Of course, there's some more subtlety to it. What in that role, I think also too, it's a somewhat unique position in that I see the inputs from beyond just the pen testers across all of the areas in Withum Cyber, which is most of the areas of cybersecurity, to include forensics, incident response, general IT security, infrastructure support, and whatnot. I see the trends as they develop. The reason why I wanted to give this talk on social engineering is that if I were to, in 2 words, summarize what the biggest trend I've noted, certainly in the post-COVID world in the mass migration to work from home operations. Generally, it's been social engineering. If I were to be asked to summarize in one word, I would say further phishing. Have some info on that later, but I think phishing is to the point now where it's widely known. And I'll get into the talk contents here, which the objective of this really is to give you a perhaps not a top level, but a semi-detailed classification type perspective, insider perspective on social engineering. In particular, some of the tools, techniques, tactics that are utilized, and how you, as an individual, as both an individual and a member, or staff of an organization, or company, firm, what have you, can improve your chances of either decreasing how juicy you look as a target to an attacker, or if you are in the process of being attacked, some defenses that you can employ. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, I guess this is largely determined by age. The individual on the screen here is Alfred E. Newman. Bonus points to anybody who even knows who that is, I guess, these days. But that's his catchphrase, is what me worry. The reason why I picked that is we've at Withum, we've noted that it can be broadly classified as two types of organizations when it comes to security. The concerned and diligent, and the what me worry types. Generally, we found that the what me worry types become very diligent and very concerned immediately after or upon being breached. Unfortunately, that's when things get usually pretty ugly. So we generally recommend a posture of diligence before being attacked. Okay, so some points of discussion, and in general, to take a drink. As Tom mentioned, all of these, I'd like to reserve, all else being equal, the last 15 minutes or so of this session to answer any questions that you have, and whether those questions are related to social engineering or a broader topic or concerns within cybersecurity. I've seen a lot of it, so by all means, as we're going through, we're going to be covering, a large swath of territory under social engineering. I recommend that if you have something you want to ask, write it down, make a note to yourself, and we will engage it at the end. If for whatever reason we're unable to engage the question at the end, I'll have my contact information along with the contact information in general for the group at Withum, cybersecurity group, and we can follow up anything after the fact as well. So, all right, so we talk about we will discuss some general social engineering points, concepts, its definition. The first part, when I say social engineering gotchas, what I mean by that is, and I use specifically reference to metadata in the Googleverse, there are things a lot of times that general users, particularly if you are not in the IT or technology sectors or world, with your primary role in what you do, you may not think about a lot of the use cases, or ultimately where a lot of your data goes once you click submit or search or log in or any number of things on anything online. And increasingly, I imagine you've probably been under a rock if it hasn't been apparent that the vast majority of commerce globally, and certainly within America and North America, is done via the internet in some capacity. So it makes the corresponding security of internet communications of paramount importance. And I think if you were to go speak to an engineer, a hardcore engineer, network engineer type, computer engineer, and were to ask them the traits of a secure network, they would tell you pretty much the exact opposite of what IPv4, Internet Protocol version 4, which is the standard, is. It's by its nature, and it's not mudslinging. It had to be built, a certain way, and there's a lot of considerations, economics, forefront amongst them. But there are some inherent vulnerabilities and weaknesses just by the platform that we use. So showing up to bat, you're going to need to make some changes. Anybody to employ or to decrease, put it this way, the bullseye. That's automatically upon you just stepping up to the plate with e-commerce in particular. But we'll talk about some of those gotchas that people often don't think about. There's a model regarding communications. It's a generalized model, but it's called the DISC model. It's a framework for personality and communication assessment, and it's used a lot, often by social engineering attackers, maybe not in a specific use case by the book, like as read from or during a Psychology 101 class, but the elements of it are the critical elements of any rapid communication or exchange assessment. And it also feeds into some other, in fact, quite a few other social engineering areas. So it does play an important foundational role. We'll talk about some of the details of that. The next three items, pretexting is first among them, and influence and elicitation. They're pseudo fancy words, definitely psychology and sociology 101 words, but they mean, which I will explain precisely what it is that they mean and refer to. What they mean, what they refer to are absolutely fundamental and critical elements of not just social engineering, but at almost a deeper level, social analysis, social assessment. It's determining, if you think about, right, an attack buildup or just a generalized conversation when you meet somebody new, regardless of your objectives, whether they be evil or otherwise, there are certain things that we as human beings do. The pretexting, influence, and elicitation, I'll reserve some of the detail until we get to it, but the point is social engineering takes a bit of a more formalized scientific view on the interactions we have. Generally, how those interactions often are applied to what we do on a day-to-day basis in support of business operations, any number of things. And by understanding them at a more clinical level, with a more rigorous detail and quantization where possible, we can in turn better defend them. So we'll get into some of that brief detail, but excuse me. Also, I touched on some nonverbal communications in the days where we are largely now in front of our computer terminal, and interaction directly with people is increasingly less common. Doesn't mean that this is a useless item, and there's still visual indicators, and we'll talk about a few of those. But and then lastly, just wrap up with, okay, what do these things mean when it comes to social engineering? We, as professionals, whether it be accountants, financial analysts, what have you, consultants, everybody has some sort of vested interest in cybersecurity, whether it's for themselves and for their client. So we'll talk about what the takeaways are and some things that, like I said earlier, mentioned earlier, there are a few things that are just very simple, straightforward things people don't often think about that can make you more secure just by doing a couple of simple steps. So we'll cover that, and then the Q&A is the wrap up. Now, Tom, was there a point you wanted to run the first question?
Yeah, let's get the audience involved here and just ask the first polling question, just so we can get started before we go into sort of the in-depth of the material here. So let's launch that, and it's a very simple question, everybody. What is the average cost of an IT breach in 2020? Very simple question. What is the average cost of an IT breach in 2020? Is it $1 million? Is it $2.5 million? Is it $5.5 million or $7.7 million? And just a reminder, folks, that all of the questions today are required for CPE credit, all the poll questions. So this is the second of 3 polling questions. Michael, just a real quick baseline while people are answering the poll question. I feel a lot of our audience, being accountants world, we have a lot of accountants, bookkeepers, payroll processors, everything like that. Would you say that this is a more vulnerable population to cybersecurity threats than the average business person, or was it lower? Is it about average? What would you say that sort of population is?
I would think the above average for the reason, and there's an asterisk next to that, and that accountants are uniquely positioned, really. In fact, that's why Withum Cyber is part of Withum Smith Brown, which is a large accounting firm. Part of that is that as accountants, right, we have duties to best reflect the best interests of our clients, and increasingly, the first indication that there is a problem somewhere can come from the accountants, from a financial analysis that is much more readily apparent to a trained professional like an accountant than perhaps anyone else other than the bookkeeper depending on the size of the company, obviously. So I think it's apparent that, and you'll see nationwide, the larger accounting firms are rapidly developing cybersecurity divisions and increasing the size of their existing ones. So I think there's actually a uniquely positioned relationship between accountants and cybersecurity. If you haven't had exposure or at this point mandatory training in cyber as an accountant, you will very shortly, would be my prediction. It's almost a guarantee.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense for sure. So we'll close the poll question and let's share those results, Michael, before we move on. So 45% say $2.5 million is the average cost of an IT breach. 32% said $5.5 million for an average cost. And then 14% said 7.7 and 9% said 1 million. So Michael, what is the average cost of an IT breach?
The highest one, so it's I believe 7.7 is the answer, and in fact, during the 3 seconds that I've just described, that is probably going up. Excuse me. There is kind of an inside joke that well, not really that inside. Those numbers are escalating tremendously, and so in large part, it depends on the source that you're looking at. But one thing that is unambiguous is the cost has, in the past 3 fiscal years in particular, has outpaced linear growth. So it's 5 times 500% growth, effectively in losses, because it's not necessarily the size of each individual loss, because again, it's the average loss. It's that hacking groups, organized crime, what have you, are getting better at targeting larger organizations. So an individual instance is on the whole significantly larger than it was in, say, FY17. And so that drives the average way up. But make no mistake, the number wholesale across in the US, which is essentially the same trend as globally, the number of successful attacks is increasing, and the average take or loss on each attack is likewise increasing. So is there anything else that's required on that, Tom, or is we're good to go into the?
No, let's go into some of the discussion. I'm eager to hear what else we have to talk about. Just be cognizant of the time, though. We have about 35 minutes left in the hour here. So.
Perfect. And some of the I'm a big fan of taking a lot of time in the table of contents portion to set up the flow, because we'll quickly go through some of these discussion points, but all of the things that I am going to be speaking to today, in fact, virtually any question that you may have related to social engineering can be answered almost certainly by this book that you're looking that I have up on the screen there. It's in cybersecurity circles, it's often referred to as the social engineering Bible, Cybersecurity Bible, a good book. And that's not to be offensive religiously. If anything, it's a compliment to how much information, the quality of the information that's contained within it. It's written by a gentleman named Christopher Hadnagy. Now, one of the things that I think is very interesting is that it was published by Wiley. They have digital hardcover and softcover editions. The second edition is the most recent. I believe it came out in 19. There have been smaller revisions over the number of years. The first edition was put out in 2002, if I'm not mistaken, it's close to 2002. Now, the interesting thing I found is that at the time, the subtitle was The Art of Human Hacking. And Hadnagy actually makes some reference and explanation of this, in that starting with the second edition, it's now changed the subtitle to The Science of Human Hacking. You see the third bullet point I have there. Certainly accountants, I think, will be familiar with the data privacy debate. Anybody in technology, for that matter, should be intimately familiar with the primary points of data privacy, information security, essentially, but at a higher level almost, the data privacy issue, writ large. I'm not going to get into that debate because it's a very deep and nuanced debate. But suffice to say, as a resident of a developed, technically advanced capitalist country in the 21st century, you are a digital marketing hunk of meat to an enormously profitable, powerful, and driven industry. If for no other reason, what drives a lot of these security concerns is that why also I think it's accurate to say that social engineering is no longer an art, that it is a science, is that all of the digital data and the data-driven marketing metrics that characterize you as a person, but more to the point, you as a consumer. I'll leave it at that again, but there is an enormous amount of data related to you, your habits, your buying trends, location-based, any number of compartmentalized data points. All of that is utilized by marketing and advertising firms to different effect and for different reasons, but that information's out there, and it has tremendous value. And so, yes, it drives the marketing and advertising industry, but because of that value, there is attempts to exploit the information for nefarious purposes and for gain illegally, which drives the cyber crime area of operations. It also likewise now enables professionals like myself and the people that I work with, my colleagues, to use more advanced scientific tools and formalisms, processes, to engage those bad actors and attempt to stop or limit their effectiveness. So I would say just this, and there's a statement that's supported by the Wall Street Journal, and that's it's estimated 80% of all data breaches have a social engineering related component to them. 80% of all breaches, and they're talking in the tens of billions of dollars in losses in the U.S. Domestic market alone in FY19, which is the last year of full data availability. And I expect that it will be considerably higher in FY20 when the results are available. So that means it's important, certainly for the accountants in the audience, get to know it. And I highly recommend this book to do that. It's the best single point of reference I can give you. Okay, briefly on the DISC model. Everybody loves acronyms. DISC is another one. So the DISC elements simply are keywords. And what is this all? What does it mean? Again, the details of it are not necessarily important. The takeaways for DISC and models like it are, they are ways to break down the individual's communication style. And you can see the diagram that I have to the right. They're keywords that are easily, it's make a rough initial quantization of a person upon interaction with them, whether that's by telephone, chat, email, what have you. Why it's important that it's something that can be done quick is that often, and you'll see that I'll often take the viewpoint, which is necessary for cybersecurity professionals. You have to take the viewpoint, the perspective of the attackers, the bad guys. It's important because bad actors often will need to quickly assess to see the effectiveness of any initial conversations, communications, what have you, with their intended target. If there's a risk, alarm bells go off, they can terminate the attack, walk away. If there is indicators that perhaps there's a more effective alternative communication style, the good ones, the smart, effective criminals, of which there are correspondingly less, right, as you can imagine, they will shift their communication style to appropriately address what they assess the individual, the target's communication style to be. So it's complementary. And that's the biggest thing. I think you'll see there's some, in particular, the very next thing we're gonna get into, right, is pretexting. And this is something that's universally familiar to people, the concept behind it. Fancy words aside, excuse me, pretexting is acting like someone else. And it's doing it to obtain what you want. In the case of cybersecurity, it's for private or privileged information. Millennials, those of you who are millennials in the audience or have kids who are, excuse me, they call it, or you may have seen it referred to as catfishing. Catfishing is a subset, an example of pretexting. It's generally, even though there's some wacky objectives or ultimate reasons as to why an individual engages in catfishing, but the objective of that is some socio romantic, often objective. Pretexting has it's objective neutral. A lot of times, and I think the most common to security professionals is what's called a romance scam. And that's individuals who meet on an online dating site, Match.com, eHarmony.com, etc. Very quick after initiating some back and forth communications, and oh, by the way, during that time, the DISC model or an analog similar to it is often employed by the attacker to determine the best way to communicate with this individual. And then inevitably will be the initial ask for oftentimes money. I think almost everybody, in fact, I do not know a single individual who doesn't know someone who has been affected by this, or who has a parent, an older parent that was affected by it, oftentimes disastrously so. And it's of all the different crime types we see at Withum Cyber, we have an active caseload with a couple examples of this. And I can tell you that this angers me and a lot of our guys directly, to see the kind of activity and the exploitation that's brought in to bear on some usually very emotionally vulnerable people. We see that in general. So again, though, broader speaking, pretexting, it doesn't have to be romance based. It can be used for any number of reasons, and at a perhaps higher level, nation state actor, intelligence organizations. It's been there's novels based on it. It's screenplay fodder, but it can be utilized for industrial espionage attempts. One thing to consider, though, is if you think about it, generally it's an investment of significant time and personnel, and cost by virtue of the personnel involved. So maybe it'll be a one-off, the lone wolf solo type attacker. Oftentimes, though, especially when it's not directly monetarily related, it will be, for example, an intelligence asset or whatever, but it'll be on a target where it's worth it to do so, because there's some risk involved with exchanges, transfers, etc. But so it has to have a payoff that's commensurate with the investment of time and risk. This all goes to illustrate, both the disk model and the initial phase of any attack is always the research phase. And in social engineering, it is particularly critical and vital to have an extensive and accurate and a timely research phase. And again, the best social engineering attackers, the best groups, or even individuals, are the ones who do that most extensively. And oh, by the way, there are online tools, open source tools, and there are some proprietary tools, but readily available tools that you can go online this afternoon, download, that are social engineering exploit applications. And they are designed to either web scrape or any number of activities to gather information on your designated target. So the last thing I'll say about pretexting is an interesting point if you think about it. That is, social engineering, one of the ploys that is often utilized by especially smart attackers is they will have a third party engaged in the communication process somehow. And at some point, the third party or the additional individual, the new individual, will either interrupt or just refer to the attacker, and the attacker will be referred to by their attack name, right, their character name. Just the act of doing this is something that validates the identity of the attacker in the mind of the target. You think about it, if you see someone new, unfamiliar individual, and there's a third party who you also don't know, but they interact with and refer to that the first individual by their name, and perhaps with some familiarity, sort of endearments or otherwise, it does at a certain level of, well, I think he must be who he says he is, or she says she is. It's an example of human nature and the subtle elements of what it is to be human that is so often exploited and manipulated by the successful social engineers. Something to think about. The influence in general, I want to hit on just two topics briefly on it, because influence, the concept of influence of social engineering is critical and central. If you think about it, they And I'll use an example here, just repeating example of an individual, an individual who is seeking to get money from another individual, right, a target. They want to influence that individual to do something as just like the general description of social engineering is to do something not in their best interest, but it's what the attacker wants them to do. Influence is how they do that. It's the vehicle by which the objective is obtained. Think of it that way. There's a larger process, more technical, described in the book. Again, I urge you to read it, but it's called reciprocal altruism. But the real takeaway is it's reciprocity when it comes to influence. There is a core human desire to reciprocate something, anything, with another individual who is kind to us or who gives us things. The giving of gifts, and you can think of any number of situations where this is true. It is biochemically true, as it turns out. And there's a fuller technical description of the biochemical response processes, and with the newest capability in functional mapping, it's FMAT, with the PET scans, positron emission tomography, brain scans, by and large. For nuclear imaging techniques of the past decade, they can see brain areas that are activated or increase in activity and reactivity with certain stimuli. And it has been proven that there is, and there's two things here I bring up because they're subtly, well, they're very related, but the subtle difference is key. So reciprocity is somebody gives you something, you feel a desire to reciprocate. So there's a feeling of goodwill that you wish to return to the other individual. Now, there's another very related concept called obligation, right? And the difference in terms of social engineering, and also I believe, psychologically and sociologically speaking, obligation is the same thing, but it's based solely upon social norms or an expected behavior, whereas reciprocity may be based on money. If you're given $10 loan, the expectation is that you're going to give it back to the individual, right? Obligation is much more generalized. Now, a deeper exploration than this format allows, of course, it's revealed in a lot of different circumstances and a lot of different tests that obligation is a very powerful influencing agent. And what drives it is because of the connection to the social norms or expected behaviors. One of the most powerful things is the avoidance of being declared an other, different from the group, to the point of overriding, the concept of desiring wealth or comfort, luxury. People, again, we're talking at a base alligator brain almost level, but there is an enormous drive to avoid being excluded. And I can tell you that, look, you're reading about it. A lot of these, in fact, all of these things are being read about in a social engineering book. The bad guys read these books too, right? And so it's very easy to be disillusioned with humanity and human nature after reading some of these books, but ultimately realize that, there are forces for good, I'll put it that way. But these are the types of things that the bad guys are seeking to exploit, and the means by which they do it. I'm going to be very quick with this slide, excuse me, and that is the authority one, because this one is particularly interesting to me, being a veteran, as I am. Anyone who's been in the military certainly can understand there's a tremendous depth of emotion and thought that goes into obedience, discipline, loyalty, and a lot of these things are very common. The military is perhaps, certainly a wartime military is perhaps an extreme implementation of it, but there are very similar emotional transfers and experiences that are the same at an organizational level within a corporation too, or within a group, a functional group within an organization. That's usually the time you see the closest, unit loyalty, right? It's akin to a platoon in the military. A functional working group where the people's true bonds, the staff's true bonds are the tightest, the people they work with day to day. You'll see sacrifices made for other individuals, etc. Authority, and this is the single largest influence agent, and also one of the most disturbing, right? I think everyone has probably at some point learned about the Milgram experiments, and I believe it was Harvard University in 1963, and it was the paper which resulted was called the Behavioral Study of Obedience, and it was a clinical examination under test conditions of the extent to which authority will influence behavior. In particular, for that experiment series was Dr. Milgram. The Nuremberg trials had been concluded 10 years prior, approximately, and World War II, of course, the atrocities, genocide, Holocaust, all of the implications of World War II, both in Europe and in Asia. People were asking these questions, and unsurprisingly, I think that authority I think can be, a non-clinical term, is to an insane extent can influence behavior. This, for a bad actor, is another opportunity. They will employ positions of authority, or even at a more subtle level, authority terms or positions of authority to influence the response from their target. There's a lot of additional studies. One of the things that's interesting, it's about the nonverbal effects and implications of authority, and I have an example of it here coming up. The last thing in terms of the psychology effects of the social engineering attacker is what they call the 4 rules of elicitation. And this is essentially a universal, and I apologize, this should be bolded on the 1, 2, 3, 4, but ego appeals, mutual interest, deliberate false statements, and shared knowledge. And it looks like some of the, oh, here it is. This is the definitions of them right here. Ego appeals, very easy to relate to. People love hearing about themselves, and even more so, they love hearing good things about themselves. So generally, and I've added my own sparkling insight to that. There is a very careful line that has to be done when someone is showering you with praise, right? There is that line of where, oh, it's very effective in sincerity to creepy time. These are all things that an effective social engineering attacker have experience with and toe the line effectively. Mutual interest, very easy description. Just here, there. Shared common interests. We both like the Mets, both hate the Yankees, or vice versa. Deliberate false statements. This is the one. By the way, the shared knowledge, very similar to mutual interest, just with some depth. I'll leave it at that. The deliberate false statement is the last thing I want to talk about, and that is, it exploits the natural human instinct or desire to correct untruth when it is observed. And this has been proven in a clinical setting, or at least strong evidence for it. And so the example is that you can make a statement, and you say you're with a group of 6 people, colleagues. And he said, the Wall Street Journal piece recently said that greater than 80% of all people use their date of birth as their ATM pin. The statement is patently untrue, especially nowadays with, I don't know the effectiveness long term with fake news and all the associated issues with that. But the point is that if you're with a group of 6, 7 people, say you make that statement, there will generally be at least one, often more, of the people that are around you that will respond not only with, that is not true, but no, I use my children's birthdays, or no, it's my mother's birthday. So they will give away, the bottom line is they will give away considerably more information than they want to or should in an effort to satisfy that base human desire to correct untruth. Again, something that can be effectively exploited by social engineers. And then the last thing, topically speaking, is nonverbals. There are several examples of this in the book by Hadnagi. Asks the question, which one of these two pictures, the same gentleman, same dress, same hairstyle, same same physical characteristics and dress, which I should probably put this, I don't know how the imagery goes with the poll question, but this probably would have been a good poll question. Which do you think is the more confident individual? I'll leave it at the answer is that Mr. Burns pose to the right there. Excellent. Excuse me. And it's, again, subtle indicators. There's a lot more examples of this in Hadnagi's book with different individuals, but posture is erect on the right. There's a hunch shoulders, a facial expression of deference on the left, whereas on the right, jaws clenched, erect posture, straight back, standing upright, hands are in a perched, a firm position. So a number of different indicators. Again, all of these things are, it seems almost trivial when looked at individually, but you roll up all of these, and I'm telling you, there are individuals who do, and they pay attention to the littlest things, and they try to utilize that to affect people the way they want. And depending on the circumstances, you may be that target. So what I recommend and what Withum in general recommends are, there's only so much you can do in terms of social engineering, because it strongly depends on the circumstances under which you are being targeted. There's a clear delineation between personal and private, particularly when it comes to social engineering. Again, the romance scams are probably the largest indicator, or excuse me, the largest example of social engineering that is exclusively or mostly exclusively and privately oriented. Just understand that we are in the 21st century, and increasingly it looks like there is going to be a pre and a post-COVID world. Buy into the new normal, to put it bluntly. There are things that their best interests are to exploit things, indicators, data, characteristics about you, which may be freely available or more freely than you would like them to be. So my sole bit of advice, broadly speaking, is to take an interest in what it is about you that's freely out there. The larger corporations, Google included, have been pretty good about it. They will offer up precisely what data is they have. In fact, a lot of the statutes now, by law, require data gathering agencies and organizations, companies, to share with you upon request what data they have, or if they have data, what they're using it for, to what ends, and who they share it with. Most vast majority of people don't know how to use that or what it even means. Take some time to learn about it, or seek advisory services. It just so happens to be that I work for one of the firms that provides those services, but I do mean this in a neutral way. There's a narcissistic, or there's a nihilistic way to look at this in a non. One is that you can invest some time and make yourself a lot more secure. The easier way to do it is to make yourself just enough secure to where a criminal would see you and do a point-by-point comparison to a similar individual or firm and realize it would be a hell of a lot cheaper to just go against an easier target. Why? They're lazy criminals as a rule, and it's always a hazard to generalize criminal behavior. But as a rule, it's not even just criminals. Any human beings are lazy, and if given the choice to do less work and have the exact same return, they will do less work. Make yourself one of the people who it requires more work to be. That's all. That's the easy way to sum it up. And of course, avail your services of the professionals when appropriate. It's not appropriate, not necessary for everyone, but when it is, my point of contact, as well as the partner in charge of Withum Cyber, Pat Ferrante, he's an ex-U.S. Secret Service agent, ran their electronic crimes division, really sharp guy, very experienced. And we personally talk with everybody who calls in to speak with us, and we'll tell you if we think you can benefit from our expertise or expertise in general. I went a little bit over, but I think we got some time for questions. Tom.
Yeah, for sure. I just wanted to get that last polling question in there,
Yes.
just to kind of jog some more curiosity from our attendees. So let's launch that. It is asking about what attack type results in the largest percentage of losses to U.S. businesses in 2019. Ransomware, malware, phishing, or keylogger attacks. So let people answer that. One question I did have, Mike, I mean, obviously one of the big things right now, it's all over the news were any attack cybersecurity wise on the election. I saw an interview with Christopher Krebs, who headed up the cybersecurity division for the United States for the government, to make sure that the elections were secure. What was the scale of that particular project? And do you know the gentleman? Do you know kind of how all of that came about, and what, if there were any interference there?
The particulars, I can tell you this. The technical details of we're thinking of the same thing. There's a demonstration of a compromise of an electronic voting equipment. There was some understandable flurry of concern following that. And in general, I think it's been demonstrated there are some compromisable, what we call attack vectors that should not be open, that are open. A lot of times just by stupid, simple lack of oversight, right, or correction. So at a procedural or a administrative, operational, I guess, level, that is something that has to be applied. So the Election Security Commission from the U.S. government is charged with that activity. I think they need to get their act together. Beyond that, the further application of, can there be universal voting from home? A lot of more advanced questions. I don't have an example, or excuse me, I don't have a readily available opinion on that, and that's mostly because I deliberately, when it comes to, particularly in the past couple of years, the news is so massaged. The message is shaped. I still haven't gotten a beat on, I'll put it that way, on exactly the extent to which I haven't found any effective means when it comes to compromisable voting, which, look, electronic voting is here to stay. It is. I think the safe thing to say is that the government is responsible to make sure there's a viable option. Beyond that, I don't know enough of the details to speak, effectively on a particular case.
No, I totally get that. It was just something that was kind of in the news and something that's going on right now. So I figured I'd ask and see if I can get kind of a beat on it for sure.
Sure. And other, look, it is like the hot topic, because it's what generally at Thanksgiving, my family, that was one of the first things that my sister and brother-in-law, first thing came up. What would think about the election? I understand it's, especially in a democracy like ours, it's a fundamental question. It's one of the true miracles that we have every 4 years, peaceful transfer of enormous power. and it is susceptible to gaming. And it's a scary thought.
For sure. I wanted to close this polling question just so we can see the results here. So we'll share those. 42% said a ransomware attack, 40% said a phishing attack, 17% a malware attack, and only 2% said a keylogger attack. So what resulted in the largest losses to businesses?
But the individuals who answered ransomware, that's not, it's incorrect in the technical, I guess, specifics of the question. But the largest increase of malware as a broad topic of attack vectors. The largest number of attacks has been seen in ransomware. In particular, it's been very high visibility. There's like those are the ones that get a lot of the headlines. Like the law firm out in LA that all the stars and celebrities, sports clients, personal private data, and they had poor security, which is shocking to me. But the criminal group obtained that information. I'm not sure that it isn't clear how much was exfiltrated in that instance, but ransomware, I'll put it this way, from our side of things, from the professional cybersecurity advisory side, I can tell you this: phishing. Think about this, right? You see all these really smart people and all this really fancy advanced infrastructure, the server racks in a cool room behind tinted glass and lights. It looks like the deck of the Star Trek Enterprise, and there's all this really cool stuff, big flat screen panels reading activity. And what is by far too, it's like 84% of ultimately all losses are phishing related. It's simply, that's the point, is that do you want to obtain this international team of assassins and intrigue to crack into a potentially highly secure corporate system with, which, by the way, a lot of these particularly very sensitive systems, definitely government and military IT networks and systems, they don't just passively look for who's trying to break in. They actively try to determine who is coming on or attempting to gain entry to the network. And they just don't leave it as, oh, well, we'll write down their IP address and check them out. They actively seek to determine everything about the inquiring address. And that can lead to, so there's a significant risk. There's all that whole side of things. And I joke about the international assassins because, the TV script writers, that's their greatest thing, is that they have these really beautiful people sitting around a pool in LA hacking away at, the CIA or something. Or is it far easier to email John in shipping, and by very straightforward and relatively simple social manipulation, just get his username and password through any number of means, and then you just enter the system as John from shipping. Once then you have credentialed access to a system, which otherwise getting through any number of firewalls, switches, fancy defense mechanisms, perimeter security devices, you get right through that with the username and password. And then once you're in, quote unquote, inside a system, I can tell you that the truly capable and talented hackers and whatnot, they will then begin to apply their expertise in what's called vertical access manipulation. They'll seek to, or access elevation. They'll seek to then begin to up what they're cleared to see, and then they'll begin to go mobile within the system from there. And that's when they begin to start pulling out files if possible, or zipping them up and encrypting them for a ransomware attack.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. And Michael, I would love to hear more about this. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. If there's any questions in our post-webinar survey that come from our attendees, I'll be sure to forward them along. I wanted to thank you very much for joining us today. We had a really great and interesting presentation. I'm going to quickly share my screen to everybody here. I want to thank you for joining us. We have our final webinar of the year. It's being done by Ron Baker, who's the founder of the VeriSage Institute, and he's also a chief value officer, say that 10 times fast, at Armiano. So his webinar is titled "The Best Learning Tool Ever Invented." It's after action reviews. So you'll definitely want to turn into that. That's Thursday, December 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern time. You can sign up for Ron's webinar and watch all others on demand at 2020webinar-webinars.com. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you,
Absolutely, and have a wonderful holiday, everybody, and we hope to see you on the 17th.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.